Again, welcome everybody to the Latrobe Council Annual General Meeting. I have to do a couple of things before we get started. I'll let people know that this meeting is being recorded, and we have to have acknowledgement to the country. The Latrobe Council would like to acknowledge the original custodians of the land on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their knowledge, culture and continuing and connection to the country. Get my paperwork in order. We have a couple of apologies from Mayor Peter Freshney and Deputy Mayor Vonette Mead. They were granted leave of absence at the 26th of February 24 special council meeting for the period of the 26th of February to the 24th of March 24 inclusive, as they are both candidates in the up and coming state election. Item 3, we have confirmation of the minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of the annual general meeting of the 15th December 2022. It's recommended that the minutes for the annual general meeting of the Latrobe Council held at the Memorial Hall on October 15th, on December 5th, on Latrobe on the 15th of December be taken as read and confirmed. Sorry. Well, a mover of that, please.
Councillor Sims. So moved.
Seconder. Councillor Weeks. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Okay. We have public participation response to questions taken on notice prior to the annual general meeting. At the annual general meeting on the 5th of December 22, the Memorial Latrobe, the following questions was taken on notice from Melissa Jemison. Council provides the following answer to the questions taken on notice. Would you like to talk to that, Mr. Monson?
I think it's self-explanatory. Just need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the response to the question from Melissa Jemison at the annual general meeting held 15th December 2022 be received and noted.
Okay. And move that motion.
Sims.
Councillor Sims. Seconder.
Seconded, Councillor Fiddler.
Fiddler. All those in favour?
Aye.
The next one is from Michael Baldock. You have the answer to that?
There's questions were received from Michael Baldock and James Redgrave. While there's no formal meeting procedures for annual general meetings, we generally follow the normal local government meeting procedures, which means there's no debate on the questions that have received. The response to the questions are in the agenda, and the recommendation is that the questions on notice from Michael Baldock and James Redgrave be received.
Would someone like to move that the questions on notice from Michael Baldock and James Redgrave be received?
So moved, Councillor Wicks.
Councillor Wicks. Seconded.
Second, Councillor Fiddler.
Councillor Fiddler. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried. We get to number 6. Public participation, questions without notice and motions from the floor. Public questions without notice from the floor. I advise members of the public are invited to ask questions in accordance with the meeting conduct outlined in the meeting procedures and guidelines on the front of the agenda. Have we got somebody who would like to have a question from the floor? Shane Ellison.
I have two questions. The first one's related to cash reserves of the councils. and I've just had a quick look through this agenda and I cannot find the current cash and cash equivalents in the end of the financial report. But that could be an oversight by me. I've seen them in the online edition. But my question is, as of February the 29th this year, how much unrestricted cash does the Latrobe Council have? Not in cash reserves and not in cash on hand. And if this question goes unanswered, as Kenny's did in January, one may ask, is this council solvent by the end of this financial year, and all councillors and executive management happy with that?
Yeah, Mr. Acting Mayor, we are looking for the previous financial year, but if it's okay, we'll take the question on notice and give you a response to that. But I can absolutely assure you we are solvent and not heading for insolvency.
Just regards to the annual report that's getting voted on tonight, I think on memory there was between $9 and $12 million in cash and cash equivalents as of June the 30th last year. I think on memory at the January 31st there was 58,000 in cash and cash equivalents in the bank account. So that's the relevance of my question.
There will be a detailed presentation on the financials when we present the annual report. So hopefully that will give you some confidence, Shane.
As council is a company or corporation, through its ABNs and ACNs, to be a company, one has shareholders. My question is the ratepayers shareholders of the said company? And if so, have any ratepayers, personal properties, businesses, land, etc., along with council offices, council properties, council land, roads and footpaths been used as equity for the $11.14 million debt as of June the 30th last year, and I believe as of January 31st this year? Thank you.
Yeah, I suggest, given the technical nature, we take that question on notice. I mean, there's quite a bit to it, and I think it'd be unfair to try and answer it tonight.
Can they be answered in the draft minutes that will presumably be accepted next Monday's meeting? Can they be answered in the draft annual general meeting minutes?
Well, the agenda for the council meeting has to go out Thursday, but we'll do our best.
Thank you.
Nobody else has any more questions? We move on to the. Sorry, you've had a couple of questions. That's allowable. What's that? Sorry.
Yeah, my suggestion, Mr. Acting Mayor, just see if anyone else has got any questions, then go back to.
I did ask if
Jane,
anybody else had any questions. Okay. You've got a motion to move.
Actually, I have a number of motions I'd like to move. The motion one, the discussion is opened up about the reason of the AGM and the 3 special general meetings since November the 30th the council has, followed by a Q&A. Thank you.
I never heard it.
Sorry, I didn't get what
We
you.
didn't hear it properly. Speaking to the microphone.
Motion one is that the annual general meeting on this day of the Latrobe Council opens discussions regarding the rescheduling of 2 AGMs and on also the scheduling of 3 special general meetings since November the 30th, 2023.
I think it's unreasonable to.
I don't
Motion
understand it.
discussion is open.
Is there a seconder for the motion? No seconder, then the motion lapses.
That's all right. Can I go to motion 2? Motion 2 is that the annual general meeting here tonight opens discussion on the recess sharing and amalgamation models and possibilities that the Latrobe Council has.
Anybody a second for the motion? You can need a seconder first. Sorry. Claudia. Second the motion. Do we have a speaker for the motion? Well, sorry, give Shane go first.
I'd like to start that I asked 2 questions of both Kenish and Latrobe in their August meetings regarding the resource sharing model that has been printed up fairly well through the last 2 years of the local government review. Both these questions were refused. Linked to that, with the local government review submissions, there is support for an amalgamation with Kenish. I've since asked on the costs of the amalgamation to the Latrobe Council, to Kenish Council, and I've also asked if it was a bigger amalgamation, which Devonport is pushing, with Central Coast and Devonport, on the total costs of the amalgamation, and other councils have answered the costings have not been done. Regarding the resource sharing model, once I was a councillor, I consistently asked for this model. I've now asked for the model again, and one is not forthcoming. I have real concerns to where that goes. Leave it to the floor.
Councillor Bullock? I can't hear. Use your microphone if you don't mind, please.
I'm happy to let Gina talk to the motion.
Any further?
Acting Mayor Brown, I would actually like to speak to motion 2 from Shane Allison to query the validity of the motion because we've never recess shared. His words were open discussion on recess sharing. I don't understand them. You said recess sharing, so I'm questioning the validity of the motion.
And
I just asked, does anyone else want to speak?
anybody else want to speak for the motion? Anybody against? Chair recognises Mr. Peter Freshney.
I'll hold it for you, mate.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. The motion is basically impossible to speak to or to information to provide, particularly in that no work's been done in regards to the Devonport, Central Coast, Kentish, Latrobe model as suggested by the mover. And it's just, that's all it is, a proposal or suggestion. So there's no work being done around that. And secondly, my understanding is that in relation to the Kentish Latrobe model, that the council has committed to undertaking significant financial research and to provide that information once researched to the electorate before asking them to consider whether an amalgamation takes place. So I understand the motion, but the work is yet to be done, and that work needs to be done to be able to be provided to ratepayers before they decide which direction that they choose. So I'd suggest that the motion be put to a vote, and I'd move a procedural motion to that effect, ask it to be put to a vote, and we can deal with that once the vote's taken. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. It's been moved that it be put to the vote. So
No, you don't. It's been put. No.
It's passed.
Motion's been
okay,
put.
we're going to put it to the vote. Right. Those in favour of the motion? Those against? sorry, those for the motion, we have 1, 2,
So what you're voting on is the procedural motion. If that gets carried, well, then there'll be no further debate. So that, just so it's clear.
so I'll, so motion's been moved and seconded. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm going to put that motion to the vote. Those in, sorry. Okay. And clarify who's for the motion. Right.
So you need to raise your cards if you support the motion, basically, which will close the debate.
Sorry,
It's the,
Mr. Freshney.
So I move the procedure motion that the motion as put forward by Mr. Allison be voted on. So I would suggest, with all due respect, Acting Mayor, that those who want the discussion to take place will support it, and those who don't want it to take place will vote in the negative. That's my understanding.
Okay. Then we'll.
And then the question was put.
and there's been a procedural motion, which would
We-
basically close the debate.
We will now put the motion of Councillor Ellison. Those in favour? 3. Those against? Oh, sorry. 4.
Should be
That's,
voting on Peter's motion.
I thought, no, we have to vote. We're voting on Mr. Allison's motion.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right. So he's moved that the motion be put, basically close the debate. Otherwise, this, like, it could be open-ended and go on for hours if you wanted to get to the bottom of the issue that's been raised.
So I might, on advice, on to put the mayor's motion.
No, Councillor Allison.
That's what I just, that's
Yeah,
what I'm
that's
doing.
right.
Yeah. Well, those in favour of Councillor Allison, right? Would you raise your cards? 1,
He's no longer Councillor Allison, by the way.
Not Councillor Allison, Shane Allison.
oh, sorry, Shane. Those against? I count. Leave my sweating down. I better put mine.
Mm.
Right. Got them all? Have we got the, who's doing the count? You doing the count, Jen?
Are you counting, Jane?
And right down the back. Okay, then the motion is lost. How many was? Well. Okay. Next one. Sorry.
The motion is that the annual general meeting of tonight of the Latrobe Council opens up discussions on concerns on financial management.
All those in favour?
That we need a second.
We need a seconder for that motion. Have one there.
James Redgrave.
James Redgrave. All those in favour?
I guess you'd ask
Oh, well,
Councillor Allison to
sorry.
speak to the motion.
Okay. Councillor, would Alison, not councillor.
Not councillor
Shane, would you,
Allison.
Shane, would you like to speak to the motion?
Phone's just gone off. In regards to financial management, I've been asking questions of the council, specifically in writing since the June annual plan and budget 2019, where I have evidence of questions answered by the accountant, again in 2020. And then since August, I have been asking questions of both Latrobe and Kenny on financial management questions. At the last Latrobe meeting, I was highlighting variances in the January 31st figures from December the 31st, and was asked to put those questions in writing before they'd been answered. I find that very discriminative. But on top of that, with all the councillors that just voted against talking about resource sharing and the resource sharing model and amalgamation, the local government minister of New South Wales 4 weeks ago tomorrow, I think, possibly is bringing a bill in that any demergers will have to be funded by councils. At this demerger, there's currently 4 regional councils want to demerge in New South Wales, and the estimated cost of a demerger is $150 million each. Now, linked to that, the future long-term planning of the council must allow for things like that to happen if there's to be any amalgamation. And then on top of other things with the financial management, I'm asking, it's an annual general meeting. You should know how much unrestricted cash you've got in the bank as of February the 29th. You've got the accountant in the room, you've got the general manager. Simple yes or no questions that many of us have been asking for years. And we get ridiculed in the media saying we've got an agenda. I've got no agenda. Anyone that knows me knows what I stood for. Accountability and transparency, cost versus benefit. And there's so much I could say, but I'm just going to leave it to the floor.
Anybody else would like to speak to the motion? A second, Mr. Redgrave, you want to say something?
Mr. Cock, in regards to the revaluations, and he explained in detail as to why the revaluations were such a massive percentage increase. And that made sense. And then we discussed the other end of that. And he had a figure of 900,000 that should be taken off. My calculation is probably double that plus. Look, this current council has been on a trajectory of big deficits and debit for a couple of years. And it's the first time I've actually been able to speak at an AGM, so thank you. And I have predicted this slope down to this particular point. Now, what is this particular council going to do once your interest rates fall due on your loan borrowings on the 1st of April this year, adding extra burden to debt and deficit within this council? And it is a concern. It's a concern for ratepayers, it's a concern for residents, and it's a concern for business owners within this municipality, because you will either have to cut back on your services or projected capex. And really, it's not quite highlighted in your annual report, but you can see it if you dig deep enough. And I think that the council needs to do a strategic review of where they're actually headed with their finances at this council. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Acting Mayor, I think to be fair to the electors that are here, perhaps the debate on this should sit on the table until such time as we do a detailed presentation on the annual report, and we'll go through the finances. I think to be fair to the people here that don't attend council meetings or necessarily get heavily into the finance, you will have a presentation which is quite detailed on the cash on hand and the debt borrowings and the long-term financial plan. So that's my suggestion. Just hold it over to after we present the annual report.
Fair enough. We have anybody else want to speak for the motion? We have a motion before us
Is everyone generally happy with that? That you get the presentation first?
Sounds like it. Those in favour?
Yeah, after we present that, my suggestion is if there's still concerns, they have a vote then.
So we'll put the motion.
No, I'm going to park the motion.
Just, okay. Sitting to it, righto. Okay, any other questions from the floor? No? Right, what do we,
Stay on the table till after we come back.
right, we've got the annual report, elected submissions.
Number 7, elected
Elected
submissions.
submissions to the annual report. That's over to you.
Yeah, so we had 2 submissions, one from James Redgrove and the other from Melissa Jemison. I've given some background information. I suggest that Mr. Redgrove may wish to speak to his submission, and then we ask Melissa Jemison to speak to her submission. And then I've made a recommendation that the 2 issues that the submissions received from James Redgrove and Melissa Jemison be noted and be considered at the next council ordinary meeting. So my suggestion, Acting Mayor, is that Mr. Redgrove be asked to speak to his submission.
That's fair. Mr. Redgrave, would you like to speak to your submission?
I never met Rick Rockcliffe or was introduced to him. However, 2 AGMs ago, I saw the man in action personally at one of the largest AGMs this council's ever had. I have to tell you this though, 37 years as a councillor and deputy mayor at one particular council would almost be a record for this state. That's a big deal. You know, I've heard a lot about the man, good, bad, but he did produce a premier of this state currently. And I did assist some that had a lot of respect for him to rejuvenate Kenny and re-erect it on the side of the highway. In my submission, I've asked that not only council, but I think the community, with the family's blessing, take a good, long, hard, deep think about someone that works tirelessly for a council for 37 years and the communities that revolve around that council, and just inwardly think, could you actually do 37 years as a councillor? I don't think anyone in this room will get to that. It's a really big thing. It's almost 4 decades. It's almost half his life. I'll tell you just quickly, because it really did take me aback. When I put this submission in, several days later, the mayor rang me. And he said, you need to withdraw this submission. And I said, why? And he said, because we know the family well. And I said, okay. But for me, this is more about the community respecting an individual that has served their community for 37 years. I asked the mayor, had you spoken to the family? And he said, no. Look, it's not about politics. This is not about anything else. This is about respecting an individual that has put 37 years of hard graft into a community, farming, poppies, you name it, he has supported them. At the funeral of Rick, I witnessed a family that respected his grandfather. And the grandkids, which was a really important, potent display of how they felt about their grandfather. The eldest grandkid, after he put his memory forward, went and supported the youngest grandkid to make sure his memory was put forward. That shows respect. And I'll get back to the first time I witnessed Rick. The people in the room at that AGM 2 years ago, that showed a lot of respect for the man too. So I think it's important that the community have a choice and a say in what is right to remember a man that spent 37 years working for his community. Hence why I believe that the suspension bridge across the Mersey, the jewel in the crown that the mayor called it, be named after Rick Rockcliffe as a Rick Rockcliffe suspension bridge. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I can't agree more with you about the great man, Rick himself. He was a very good member of our community. But I can assure you we are working with the Rockcliffe family to find a suitable way to honour Rick. No worries.
I'll just add one comment there. I actually suggested to the mayor at the time to ring you. I knew Rick very well, spent a lot of time with him, and he was gravely ill when you put that submission in, and actually passed away 3 days later. So I just thought it was inappropriate at the time that motion be put forward. So I know Mr. Redgrave's left the meeting.
We've
Mr.
got-
Acting Mayor now
we've got-
suggests Melissa Jemison.
Sorry. You may respond.
I think we'd all like to respond to that.
If I may, absolutely, for those here, council is working with the family of the late Rick Rockcliffe, so that their thoughts are paramount in what we do going forward. Like we did when the late Darryl Baldock died, we worked with his family, his widow and his family, and ultimately provided a very fitting memorial. And likewise, it's the intention of council to do the same. That is to work with the Rockcliffes and for them to determine what's appropriate and for them to determine where that memorial should be. If that presentation wasn't political, then I'd ask why the speaker left the room after he finished. Clearly, that's what it was about. It's a shame that Rick's name's been used like that, and I very much regret that and apologise to the family that that issue has been brought up in this context. It's certainly not what was intended. And when I did speak to Mr. Redgrave during that time, it was when Rick was gravely ill, and it wasn't appropriate to approach the family when he was dying in the hospital, to be frank. That's the truth. So thank you for allowing me to clear the air. And I, as I say, absolutely put on the record that council will work with or without me as mayor. They will work with the Rockcliffe family to provide a suitable memorial for Rick and to reflect his contribution to this community, not just through local government.
Thank you.
So,
We now have a Mr. Jamieson
I know,
submission.
yeah, Melissa's in the room, and in some ways, the issue she raised has been basically moved on because council subsequently did approve the development application. So I don't know whether Melissa would like to speak to it. No, so Melissa's noted she doesn't wish to speak. So I don't think there's any need for the people here to debate those issues. So I just recommend the recommendation.
Well, the recommendation is that the submissions received from James Redgrave and Melissa Jamieson be noted and be considered at next level council ordinary meeting. A mover and a seconder. Mover Gina. Seconded. Gina. Got a seconder for the motion?
Yeah, happy to second.
Councillor Wicks. All those in favour? All those against? Motion carried. Right. The now have the presentation and adoption of the annual report.
Thanks, Mr. Acting Mayor. We have got a presentation, so hopefully you can read some of it on the screen and I'll speak to it. I do apologise for the lateness of the annual general meeting. While our accounts were submitted late, we lost key staff at a crucial time. There's also shortage of accountants in the state, so also the auditors also had some delays with theirs. So I'll just go through, I guess, the council's planning process. We adopted the strategic plan. So 2020 to 2030, we agreed at the time that every 4 years we'd review that plan. But new councillors that came in, that would give them 2 years into their role, have some knowledge of the community. So they would have more knowledge of what the priorities were. So that process is about to start. Under the strategic plan is the financial management strategy and long-term financial plan. At the February meeting this year, we adopted a new plan, and we'll talk briefly about that tonight. When we do the budget, we produce an annual plan and budget estimates, and that's basically on the year ahead, going back a while now, 18 months ago. And then the annual report, which is what we're doing tonight, that reports on the things that we said we were going to do and what we did to achieve those. So that's basically a summary. When we did the council's priority projects, as part of the strategic plan, we identified 4 of those. Given the financial year finished at the end of June, I will take this opportunity to update those present on some of the major projects since that time. I think a few people here will be interested in those. So the first one in council's priority projects, it was the Latrobe Flood Protection and Stormwater Plan. So back in the year 22-23, the majority of the construction was undertaken on that. It's a $15.5 million project, and it's probably 98% completed now. You see the photo on the screen, and yeah, it looks a lot different now. We recently held the Henley on Mersey event, and there was lots of comments on how good it's looking down there after the rehabilitation. The second major project was the Wild Mersey mountain bike trails. We completed the final 12 kilometres of the trails in 22-23, and in the last week, after much negotiations and toing and froing with Parks and Wildlife, we have got final approval to basically build the approach tracks, hoping to get those completed as soon as possible. Be nice if it won't be done by Easter, but we're doing our best to get them open. The third major project was the Port Sorell Caravan Park upgrade, and that was a $2.5 million project. It was one of those where we took up interest-free loans for 3 years, and we'll talk about that later. And so the bulk of the work was done in 22-23, but since then it's almost completed. Just waiting for the boom gates. And I think if you look at the entrance, I think once the vegetation grows, it's certainly a big improvement in what we had. And the fourth major priority project was the Banksia facilities redevelopment. It looks a lot different now than what it did when that photo was taken during construction. Council spent almost $6 million, and certainly been very, very positive feedback on that. Certainly attended the opening on the 29th of September 2023, and since then it's been great to see the playground basically packed of weekends with young children and their families. So they were the 4 major projects. As you can see, although it's a 10-year strategic plan, most of those have been finished. So we'll roll forward the strategic plan for another 10 years, and the new council will then determine what their priorities are over the next period. They didn't comment on the performance. We operate under 4 sections of the council. So just a quick comment on the governance. We continued with the resource sharing agreement with Kentish Council. That's been going for over a decade now, and is both state and nation leading on what we do. We implemented a new software doc assembler for the production and delivery of council meeting documents, and that has, Sarah thinks it's been a godsend, and has certainly assisted with the shared services between the 2 councils. Certainly allowed the executive assistants that prepare the council agendas a lot more efficient, and a good backup for both offices. We assisted the Tasmanian Electoral Office with the local government elections. It was the first time we had compulsory voting. Did cost council a lot extra, but I think it's generally been well supported, and the turnout rates increased dramatically across the state. and we made 2 submissions on the review into local government, and the last submission was submitted last week, February the 29th. So we're now waiting to see who forms government and what happens with local government reform. So in the community and economic development area, but this is an area which is basically the heartbeat of the community and a lot of the nice things we do. So just a bit more time in here because there's a lot been happening. The Chocolate Winterfest was re-established as a major event, and I think Michelle Dutton's here. Yeah, so it was a bit at risk at one stage whether we'd have buy-in from the business community, but again, it was big crowds and well supported. We produced an economic profile of Latrobe municipality, and during the 28th to 30th of April, that's the last year, the first ever Quad Crown event was held at the Wild Mersey, and this long weekend coming, we've got the second round of that. The event's called Wild Penguin. So there's one race at the Penguin and then 2 major events here. So there's a lot happening on the long weekend, but if you're free, I encourage you to go and have a look. We had the Australia Day Awards, and Citizen of the Year was Helen Boscawl, Young Citizen of the Year, Miss Amelia Burberry, and the Community Event of the Year, Latrobe High School. And one of my favourite events of the year has always been recognising the volunteers. So I think it was on Saturday, the 20th of May. And that was held at the Hamilton Hub. Always a great atmosphere. And when you look at the service certificates that were presented, there's several there that had served 40 years as a volunteer. So I will name them given the significant milestones: Phyllis Hingston, Aubrey Campbell, Karen Brown and Greg Dowse. But it is a great event. Encourage people to make nominations for that. And it's growing from strength to strength each year. We launched the Calibre Business Association. That was going to be held in the previous October. It was basically after the weekend of the floods, and the only way you could get the Accidents Hall of Fame was by boat. So we decided we'd postpone that, and that was held on the 18th of January. It was well attended, probably 70 or 80 people. If you look at the photo, quite a few politicians attended, but Calibre is playing a really good role within the communities. Following the completion of the coastal pathway between Bells Parade and Ambleside, the park run got established. And again, I thank Michelle Dutton for her work in that. She continues to act as a volunteer. Council put some funds in. So the first event was held on the 6th of August 2022. And then in the October, the flooding event, again, put everyone under pressure. Thankfully, the damage wasn't as great as back in 2016, and it certainly highlighted a lot of the improvements that were done, particularly with letting people know, and the flood management was much improved compared to 2016. I will note there that the Young Citizen of the Year this year, Jesse Beveridge, he's part of the Swiftwater Rescue, and in the last couple of weeks, they've been up cleaning a lot of the plastic, which you can see there out of the rivers. So Jesse's an outstanding young individual, and he's also been called in with the team to do work in New South Wales and Queensland following their floods. And a lot of that came to after the 2016 event, when I think they had just citizens trying to get people out of floodwaters. It was recognised the real need to have some qualified people do that work. So that group's been established and is getting known Australia-wide. Under the infrastructure and assets, that team's been involved in delivering the 4 major projects that we talked about earlier, but just a lot of these projects go over more than one financial year. So I'll give you an update because I know there'll be interest in where some of the projects they worked on last year are going this year. Certainly the Latrobe Recreation Ground redevelopment. I know there's a lot of interest in where that's going. We've called tenders. The work is about to start on that. I guess it does highlight one of the issues we've had. It started out at a $1.5 million project. We got funding from the state and federal governments of $500,000 each. It was the third. With the increased costs, it's now a $2.7 million project. So the council's had to fund 2/3 of the project, and the state and federal governments is 1/3 of the funding combined. So in our submission at the moment to the candidates with the forthcoming state election, we've actually raised that as a major issue about indexing grants that we get. And we're not the only one in that state, and quite a few councils across the state have had to return funds because the costs have escalated that much. Funding's been returned. Hamilton Street, Latrobe, the planning for that, and we're about to start work on the curb and channel and reconstruction in Hamilton Street from Cotton to Thomas Street. Squeaking Point Road reconstruction, the planning was done. That was like $1.2 million. That work's been completed. Percival Street drain, again, $700,000 or $800,000 project. The work's about to start on that. And the Gilbert Street roundabout on the corner of Percival Street, that's with state growth at the moment, and work will commence on that soon. And back at Bell's Parade, there's a stormwater upgrade and a connection into the shared pathway. Also thank the tree committee that they're doing plantings across the Latrobe and Ports Royal area, and they planted Stanley Street and the Bass Highway in Gilbert Street from Stanley Street up to the Bass Highway. Under the Development and Regulatory Services, the planning scheme, which was 4 or 5 years in the making, we've had over, I think, 62 submissions in the last phase of that, and the new planning scheme finally came in on the 10th of May 2023. We went live with common software to manage development and regulatory functions for Latrobe and Kentish councils. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we spent a lot of time and effort on doing new software, and this is part of that continual rollout. We had 218 building applications, which included, I think, 104 houses, 288 development applications, and we registered 2,710 dogs, which hopefully that's the majority of them, but you never quite know. I guess one of the key challenges in the future before we get onto the financials is the rehabilitation of the former Ports Royal landfill site. It's getting up close to 20 million. I'm due to retire in June, but it is one of the major priorities for the council is to continue lobbying the state government. Hopefully they will go dollar for dollar in the rehabilitation of that area. They have funded all of the investigations, which would be over close to $1 million over the last few years. The state government has been going dollar for dollar with that. And I'm sure at some stage in the future, when you've got a 13-hectare site of parks and gardens in the middle of the Port Sorell, people will forget that it was ever a tip site. But it is a major issue for the council moving forward, and it is important that the state government continue to fund that, hopefully through the increase in waste levies. That I think it's important that some of those funds are retained for legacy issues such as Port Sorell. Just some background, the council did have operating, I came here in 2007, and we had operating surpluses to 2020. There has been a couple of years where we had operating deficits. Back in 2020, when we had COVID, the council had $12 million in the bank and was debt-free. The Premier at the time, Premier Gutwin, described councils as having lazy balance sheets. He said the same about Taswater and encouraged them to borrow money to fund the infrastructure. He did encourage councils to do the same. Council borrowed $6.25 million, that was mentioned earlier by Shane, to do, we brought forward projects. It was interest-free for 3 years, and they do come off this year, and Andrew will talk about that. I guess if you're doing that, if we hadn't brought those projects forward and you were doing them with the increased costs, you'd be lucky to afford them. So while the redevelopment of the Banksia facilities was an example, we got $4 million of that from the federal government, and the council finished up putting in 1.7 million. When we went to tender on that, it was another nearly 1.5 million over that, so we had to cut some of the infrastructure out. But yeah, so I think that it has been good that they were brought forward, but with new assets, you have increased depreciation. But again, you are building intergenerational assets, and so the next generation and the one after that will get the benefit for a lot of the work done. So there's no doubt the last 3 years with inflation, the limited resources, the October 22 floods, and the windstorm event at Kentish, which drew resources from Latrobe and Kentish into that area to recover. And I guess that is one of the advantages of the shared services. If one of the others has a major disaster, they do help each other out. So it's certainly not been a normal period over the last 3 years. I think moving forward, it is the time of consolidation for the council. Certainly in the 17 years that I've worked at Latrobe Council and 14 years at Kentish, I've been very proud of the achievements. I think Latrobe and Ports Royal and the Kentish area we've done a lot of new infrastructure works and services over that period, things like the hydrotherapy pool and upgrading of the recreation ground and many other major projects. So certainly this will be my last annual general meeting. Might come as a witness next year, but it's certainly been an honour and a privilege to serve the community over that time. I'll now hand over to Mr. Cock, who's going to give an overview of the financial position of council. And I suggest after that's made and you receive the report, you then open up the other discussion that Shane Allison put forward. So hand over to you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Monson. Yeah, I'll start with just a high level, go to the next slide, Sarah, just a high level comparison of the financial results compared to budget. So council had revenue of 27.3 million, which was down 1% on the original budget. Expenses of 17.9 million, which was up 15% on budget, and a net operating surplus of 9.4 million, which was down 2.8 million on the original budget. I should just point out those figures inside the green arrows up there, the -1% for revenue, the 15% increase for expenses, and the $2.8 million variance from the original surplus. The figures on there's similar graph on page 84 of the annual report. There's been some typos there, so they'll need to be corrected. So apologies for that. Those figures aren't correct in the annual report, but they will be corrected. So yeah, that operating surplus of 9.4 million, that's the surplus in accordance with accounting standards. So if council was a publicly listed company like a supermarket, Woolies or Coles or one of the banks, then or even one of the other levels of government, that's the surplus the council will be reporting. So on that measure, council had a surplus. The other figure that council uses, the underlying result or the underlying deficit in this case, is a financial sustainability measure that the local government division and the audit office brought in. So, and council does aim for an underlying surplus over the medium term, but to have an underlying deficit in any 1 year is not a complete disaster. What you basically can't do is, what's not sustainable, you just have repeated underlying surpluses over the long term, but that's not what council's planning to do. So the next slide, just at the bottom there, so council's underlying operating deficit was 1.8 billion after adjusting for capital grants and other non-recurring once-off items. So just the key factors that contributed to that underlying deficit, because the original budget was for a $49,000 underlying surplus. So the main factors were firstly a reduction in council's share of profits from Darwin and Waste Management Authority. The budget was for 395,000 more than what council received. That's basically a non-cash item, which just represents council's equity share of those profits that are still retained within Darwin's balance sheet. But the budget was based on the best information that Darwin could provide council at the time. The next item, an $806,000 loss on write-off of assets disposed during delivery of capital projects. So around half of that related to assets that were demolished as part of the Banksia facilities redevelopment, and the balance was mainly roads and stormwater infrastructure that was basically replaced before it quite got to the end of its useful life, and so it's effectively like an adjustment for under depreciation. So those first two items I just talked about are basically non-cash items. The third one is basically $603,000 of overhead costs that would, according to the budget, have been allocated to capital projects, but because 5.18 million of capital expenditure was deferred to the next year, then that I guess credit that would have been applied against those overhead costs remained in council's operating costs. So it was basically a hit to the operating result for the 2023 year. The next slide is just, I guess, in terms of what's impacted the result. Obviously, everyone will be aware inflation over the last couple of years has been significant. There's just some examples there on the screen of some of our expenses and the inflation impact. So just gone for the last 2 years. So between 2021 and 2023, land tax charged to council increased by 56,000, which is around nearly 45%. Water and sewage rates over the same period increased by 25,000, which is almost 10%. And depreciation increased by 399,000, which is 11.6%. And another point there, depreciation is budgeted to again increase for the current 2023-24 year by 790,000. And those depreciation increases are a direct result of inflation. And it's not just the new assets that are being built now that council pays more for that lead to increased depreciation. It's also the fact that the entire infrastructure that council has, the whole lot is revalued, and that leads to an annual increased depreciation charge for every future year. Just related, I guess, to the increased depreciation is the increase, and that revaluation is the increased valuation of council's assets. So this is just an example of just the level of assets that council's dealing with. So council's property, infrastructure and plant and equipment assets have a book value of 378 million. So that's their cost to construct them now, yes, less the accumulated depreciation over their life to date. So the majority of that is roads, bridges and footpaths, which is around 229 million. Then we have drainage assets of around, it's a bit fuzzy on my screen, make it a bit bigger, sorry. I think it's around 37 million of drainage assets, around 30 million of building assets. Then land and land under roads, which they're not depreciated, but again, they're around 25 million each. So yeah, I guess the point is there is that $378 million worth of assets puts, I guess, into perspective some of those other numbers like the annual depreciation. This next slide is just showing, I guess, the point here that, as the General Manager alluded to, we have been in extraordinary times. In response to COVID, there was a call for councils to invest in infrastructure projects and help to stimulate the economy. You can see there that graph there is showing council's capital spend over a 10-year period. You can see there the spike that sort of coincides with a little bit of a lag to get projects up and running, but basically the spike there represents the response to COVID and the historically high capital program. And the point there is that responding to COVID and delivering that program has meant the need to change some of the structure of council's budget, which has led to some additional costs, which may potentially start to unwind as those capital projects get delivered. This slide just shows council at the end of the financial year had cash on hand of 10.4 million, or cash and investments, sorry, of 10.4 million, and that was a decline from 15.9 million at the end of the previous year. The main reason for that reduction, it reflects the borrowings and grants that came in to fund those capital projects last year being spent over the course of the 2023 year, and that's budgeted to reduce again over the next year as those projects get completed. This graph's just showing the cash and investments on hand both over the past 4 years and the next projected 4 years. And it's comparing those against the benchmarks set by the Valuer General. So the green line is showing council's level of cash and investments. The black line and the grey line are basically the benchmarks set by the audit office. So they basically look at how much operating cash flows council needs to outlay during the year, and they set a benchmark or a minimum benchmark of around 3 years to be maintained. Council has chosen to aim for 4 years, but you can see that green line is well above both of those benchmarks over the period covered in the graph there up to 2027, and that's similar over the 10 years of council's long-term financial plan. Council's borrowings went down by 75,000 over the year, just reflected some repayments made. So at the end of the year, the borrowings were 11.25 million, down from 11.175, down from 11.25 million at the end of June last year. So just some details on those borrowings. There were 2 interest-free stimulus stimulus loans drawn down, one for 2.45 million, mainly for the Portsreal Caravan Park redevelopment, and then one for 3.8 million, which I won't read each of those out in detail, but yeah, the Banksia facilities, the Wild Mersey Bridge, road upgrades and Bosworth Park development, as well as a little bit of additional expenditure on the Caravan Park. So those 2 loans, as the General Manager alluded to before, they fall due to be refinanced in April this year. So the 2.45 million one is expected to be refinanced for 10 years. At this stage, the expectation is around 5.2% interest rate, and the 3.8 million one is expected to be refinanced for over 20 years, again at around the 5.2% mark. That's yet to be confirmed with our lenders. And the final loan there is one taken out in June last year to fund the Latrobe flood mitigation. So originally that was a $5 million loan, and there's been one repayment made against that loan to date. So yeah, the next graph there is just, I guess, what we've been looking at is, and what this night's mainly about, is the results for the 2023 financial year. But in terms of forward-looking, and certainly in terms of a question that may be asked, is that the underlying result, the underlying deficit, likely to continue? Certainly, the council's long-term financial plan there, the blue line is the underlying result graphed over the period of that 10-year plan. So you can see there in the 4 years, for the next 4 years, there will be some, or is expected to be some underlying deficits, but then from around the 2027-28 year, then the council is forecasting to go into underlying surplus, and over the 10-year period of the plan is expected to have an average underlying surplus of 290,000. So I guess in terms of the long-term sustainability of the council, that's what gives council confidence that they're heading in the right direction. The other graph there, the green line, is council's cash and investments. So again, that's showing that, you know, over the term to 2033, 34, that cash investments is expected to be above the benchmarks that the audit office set. I might just, in terms of the Councillor Allison's question in relation to unrestricted cash, there's some, we're using cash and investments there interchangeable. There's some definitions that the audit office use in terms of term deposits and whether they can become, at what point they become cash. So if a term deposit is longer than 3 months, it's not a cash and cash equivalent, it's an investment. And so we have investments that sort of flick backwards and forwards between meeting the definition of cash and cash equivalent and not during the year. So that's, I guess, one part of the answer to your question, Councillor Allison. The other part in terms of the restriction over cash. Point of order, Mr. Allison, not Councillor. I'm also Councillor Allison as well. Sorry, I'm former Councillor Allison. Sorry, I've lost the train now. The other part of Mr. Allison's question was about the restrictions on cash. So there's very few legislative restrictions on cash for local government in Tasmania. So for a restriction to be there on cash, it would need to be, council would need to actually make a decision to place a restriction on the cash, or there'd be a restriction there from another reason. So the main reasons at the moment the restriction would be on our cash is one, that there's a grant deed that restricts the use of the cash, and so there is, for example, an amount of, I think it's 500,000 at the end of the 2023 year that council received as part of a grant that hasn't been spent yet. So that's a restriction on that cash. And the other main restriction is where people lodge deposits and guarantees and things with council. So generally deposits and trust funds, and there's a restriction on use of those. But generally, there's not other restrictions on cash in particular. So that's
Thank you.
just a bit of clarification on that before I throw it back to.
Any questions of Andrew? Shane? Shane, I'll recognise you. You got a question of Andrew?
Specific point of my question is that unrestricted cash has no obligation. So hypothetically, if you had 10 million in the bank and you had 8.5 million in federal funding for a project, you needed operation expenses of $1 million, you've got 500,000 unrestricted cash. Basic accounting. In line items in your annual reports, I believe up to 1819 had a line item of unrestricted cash. So tonight there's a figure up there for this financial year of 6.1 million in cash and cash equivalents. And on memory, it was 58,000 as of January the 31st. How does the council intend to pick up to get back to budget at 6.1 million of cash and cash equivalents?
Through the chair, the cash and cash equivalents are effectively kept at a minimum, so basically keep the amount in cash and cash equivalents to the amount that we need to meet the debt as it comes due, and put as much as possible into term deposits to maximise the return council. So the low amount that you're quoting is the cash equivalents because the balance of funds weren't needed, immediately, so they were invested in term deposits to maximise the returns. So those cash equivalents hadn't been spent; they'd been transferred to a different category of asset, which is basically term deposits. So when that money is needed, those term deposits get redeemed, the cash equivalents go up in time to pay the debt.
So it's no different than any household. If you've got cash in the bank, you'd put it on a term deposit and get a better interest rate. So we do the same.
I'm not answering how much of that is in unrestricted cash.
think we're using a different definition of unrestricted cash. Yeah, the definition,
My definition is unrestricted cash has no hold on it. Any company, any organisation understands what unrestricted cash is. And obviously the council did, as it used to have a line item of unrestricted cash going back in all its annual reports. Up until, to quote me, to 1819, I believe.
I think Mr. Cox, the qualified accountant, I don't know what your qualifications are, Shane, but yeah, I mean, I think Andrew's explained the situation. We've got plenty of cash on hand. We meet the Auditor General's requirement on the minimum cash held, so I don't know where we're going to get anywhere with this.
Can't see him.
I'm sort of intrigued by this conversation because obviously council has a series of assets that are investments, capital assets, and you've got staff and other things to cover. And we've seen the nature of the expenditure and the income. And to my understanding, you've probably got what, about $10 million of capital reserves. Now, what form those investments are, whether they're, you know, term deposits or liquid cash that Kush is speaking of. I mean, in terms of the level of assets, in terms of the sort of turnover and cash flows, what is the minimum level of capital reserves that you can draw on that would be a safe operating level? Because currently we're sitting at 10 million. I mean, could that be reduced lower to reduce the borrowing liabilities, or is that sitting about where it needs to be?
I could ask, this is a question that I know ex-Mayor Fresney or Mayor Fresney asked for a number of years. So how much money do we need in the bank? It's been a big issue asked in local government, and I think Premier Gutland also raised that issue. In the end, the Auditor General came up with his benchmarks. It's not perfect, but that's what he believed it would require. And I know Andrew and I, he puts the accounting speak on it, but is there a right amount? Maybe you can give the accountants and Andrew, but it is a question that's been asked for a number of years. I know years ago at Dorset Council, like they had 17 or 18 million dollars in the bank, and it became their second biggest revenue item. So that you got to be careful, because then when they went to spend it all, they lost one of the biggest revenue item, which was interest on their deposits. But I don't know if there's the right answer. But the Auditor General did bring out those benchmarks. So, Andrew, do you want to have the accounting response to that? Thanks.
yeah, I think it's the same response. It's, yeah, I guess in terms of how much cash council needs, or in terms of your financial management, you're generally looking at your current assets compared to your current liabilities, and looking at that, looking to match those, because I guess there's cash and what can be converted to cash, so things like your receivables and those sorts of things. But yeah, I guess in terms of the Auditor General's figure, under his benchmark, the minimum the council should be maintaining would be around, based on, you know, current the levels of operating cash flows, around between 3 and 3.2 million is around the figure that they're suggesting is sort of your minimum cash holdings.
Can't hear the question.
It was just a comment that obviously there's a prudent and sensible contingency in place for anything that may arise in the future, possibly.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why you need to aim for operating surpluses over time and have some cash in the bank, because you obviously want to meet your cash flows, but also if you have, you know, unforeseen events such as the flood damages we've had at Kentish, the windstorm events. So over the years, we've had several of those here, like the 2016 floods, and council has been able to fund that. Although we got 75% of the cost from the federal and state governments, we were able to fund our 25% and substantial dollars without basically impacting the viability of the council moving forward. So it is good to have some, like every household, just have a bit in the piggy bank to meet those unforeseen events that come up.
Mr. Ellison?
I'll just finish with that I've got major concerns in regards to my qualifications. I'm a qualified carpenter and joiner at 1983. I have a diploma in business management. For the last 20 years, I've been working on major projects up to $1 billion. Think to that, I've been a board member of a public listed company limited by guarantee. I do understand the questions I'm asking, and I've been asking them since 2019 of this council. And I have real concerns with the financial reports and the financial statement in this financial report, how it has no cash flows. You'll go back in previous financial reports up to about 19, 19. Cash flow statements were there. You could see what you paid out to consultants, various things like that. And also that added to that concern is that at your last meeting in February, you voted in to only do quarterly, monthly financials, reporting to your councillors instead of the quarterly, instead of monthly. So over the years, it's always been monthly, and now it's going to quarter. I've got so many questions there. And why aren't cash flows in the financial statements?
Through the chair, page 109 of the annual report has the statement of cash flows. Oh, sorry.
On the annual report that's been distributed to the public tonight is 98 pages. The annual report that was put out on the Tuesday at about 11 o'clock, some 24 hours after it should have been put out, had more pages. I have that downloaded at home. Andrew's quoting page 109. It's not in here.
Yeah, I
This is
downloaded
confirmed.
mine off the internet this afternoon. Sorry.
Yeah, look, I mean, the full accounts have been put out. I guess to give the electors here, to get, I think Andrew responded to that. To give the electors here comfort, going back, we over 20 years ago, lots of councils got in trouble, and it was generally to do with finance. And the Auditor General set out half a dozen key performance indicators, which are used as a benchmark. The idea going back 20 years was that if, councils were getting into financial trouble, often it led to councils finished up. They started to argue about limited resources, and there were several councils were dismissed. So they put out key performance indicators. They're in our annual plan, how we're meeting them. We have an audit panel. The issue has never been raised about any red lights or anything else about our financial sustainability. But maybe you put the motion, recommendation is the annual report be received, and then go back and then bring the other issue off the table that Shane mentioned before.
Okay. It's a recommendation that the report for the financial year 22-23 be adopted and that the 22-23 audited financial statement be received.
I'll move, Councillor Sims, that the annual report financial statement 2022-23 be adopted.
Moved by Councillor Sims, seconded by Councillor Shane Ellison.
There'll be discussion now. It's been moved.
It's now open for discussion. Sorry.
Let's just get out, let's just.
I've already done it. Okay. All those in favour? All those against? Sorry, you voted for something you didn't know what you was voting for?
Yeah, obviously not.
Councillor Sims and seconded by me. We get to talk on that motion, on that motion. And then there's a vote.
Okay. Would someone like to speak to the motion? For the motion?
Yeah, look, as the mover, the discussion's been held and it was to adopt the annual report and the financial statement.
That is correct. So it's
I-
it's to
As
move,
the second,
it's to move formal presentation. It's a recommendation that the annual report be adopted and we've moved and seconded.
as the second of the
And
motion,
do
I'd
we
like
need
to
to,
speak to the
do we
motion.
need to have a discussion on it?
No, it's already been discussed.
That's not your decision to make, councillor Sim.
He seconded the motion. Looks as though he's going to speak against that.
Can I second the motion?
Sorry?
I'd like to second the motion.
There does seem to be some confusion that councillor Allison seconded the motion that he obviously doesn't support. That Shane has seconded the motion. There seems to be some confusion because he seconded a motion that he obviously doesn't support. So, Mr. Acting Mayor, I'd suggest you get a seconder.
I'll second the motion. And I have nothing further to add.
So as a point of order then,
Before Mr. Allison spoke.
as a point of order, then we'll accept councillor Sims's motion and seconded by councillor Martin.
Thank you.
Is any debate? Then?
Any debate?
Put the motion.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? One. The motion is carried.
Yeah, so the record Shane voted against.
Thank you very much. And that brings our, unless,
So Shane did have a motion that's sitting on the table about the financial sustainability of the council. I noticed your seconder is no longer here. So, so whether you just let that sit on the table forever, it's up to you.
Let's do that.
In the garbage.
Great.
All right, that's good. Yep, all right, thank you.
that'll be it. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. And I'll formally close the meeting.
Can we go to Billy's?